In November 2000, on November 6th, at around 9:15 p.m., Kristin Rossum's beloved husband was unconscious on the floor and not responding. Kristin called 911 to report finding her husband unresponsive on the floor. She told the operator that he had taken his own life. When questioned by police, Kristin initially attributed her husband's condition to a mix of cold medicine and stress. However, the CCTV footage revealed something unexpected had happened to her beloved husband. And Kristin's husband's autopsy was also shocking. Who is Kristin Rossum? Who killed her beloved husband? Why was he killed? Who was the culprit? This is your partner in crime stories. Subscribe and let's move along. This mysterious journey ahead. Kristin Rossum was born in Memphis, Tennessee, but she didn't stay there long. Her family soon moved to Claremont, California, just 30 miles from Los Angeles. Claremont was a peaceful town, far removed from the hustle and bustle of the big city. Compared to Los Angeles, where crime rates could be high, Claremont was a haven. It was the perfect place for a family to settle down, and that's exactly what the Rossums did. Kristin grew up there with her two younger brothers. Her father was a college professor, and her mother worked at Azusa Pacific University. They provided a stable and nurturing environment for their children, surrounded by the quiet charm of Claremont. For a while, everything was good for the family. They looked like any other happy American family, living the good life. But as Kristin got older, things started to change. She had a tough time as a teenager. Then, in 1991, Kristin's dad got a job as the president of Hampton-Sydney College. It was a big job offer, but there was a problem. It was across the country in Virginia. Even though it meant leaving everything behind, Kristin's dad took the job. Without thinking twice, the whole family packed up and moved to Virginia. Kristin didn't like the move at all. When they got to Virginia, her parents put her in an all-girls school named St. Catherine S. But instead of helping, it made things worse. Kristin started causing trouble. First, she started drinking alcohol, even though she was too young. Then, she started smoking cigarettes, even though she was too young for that too. But things got even worse. Kristin started smoking things that were illegal at that time, from 1991 to 1992. It was clear she wasn't happy at her new school, and it didn't stop there. Things were about to get even more serious. In 1992, when Kristin was about 16, her behavior took a turn for the worse. She started messing around with really dangerous chemicals, like the kind you'd see in a TV show about a guy who cooks meth. It only took a few times for Kristin to get hooked and become dependent on this stuff. For the next 2 years, Kristin was stuck in the hold of addiction. It almost destroyed her life, controlling everything she did. By 1994, she'd had it with Virginia and moved back to California. She started going to the University of Redlands part-time and even stayed at the university. At 18, she was legally an adult and free to make her own choices, but she was still battling her addiction. We're not sure how long Kristin stayed in college, but her addiction got worse. Eventually, she had to leave there. Some people think she might have been kicked out because of her addiction, but who knows not exactly what the reason was. Around this time, Kristin met a guy who grabbed her attention. He was Gregdevillers. According to some friends, his name is like Davy. But here's the story between Greg and Kristin, and we'll just stick with Greg for now. After leaving college, Kristin took a break and planned a trip to Tijuana, Mexico. While in Tijuana, Kristin met Greg, a decent guy who could tell she was going through a tough time. The story says Greg spotted Kristin after she dropped her jacket. He kindly picked it up for her, and they hit it off right away. To Greg, Kristin seemed like a good person who just had some tough breaks. From the moment they met, Greg could tell Kristin was going through a tough time. As they spent more time together, he learned about her addiction struggles. He was determined to help her overcome it, and amazingly, he did. They met in December 1994, and with Greg's love and support, Kristin managed to take her out of her addiction over the next few years. With Greg by her side, Kristin also went back to college, this time at San Diego State University. She not only finished it, but she did well and passed with honors. After Greg helped Kristin completely change her life and supported her through every step, she fell deeply in love with him. It was obvious he felt the same. So, after dating for almost 5 years, they got married in June 1999. But their happiness didn't last long. Just a few months later, tragedy hit. Now, here is the twist. Kristin told some friends that before marrying Greg, she began to doubt if it was the right decision. She didn't explain why she felt this way, but she thought it was just nerves before the wedding. However, as time passed, those doubts didn't go away. Kristin started to believe she'd made a mistake in her entire life. For the first 6 months of their marriage, Kristin and Greg were happy. But as time went on, Kristin's feelings started to change, and she started regretting marrying Greg. Instead of asking for help or talking to a professional about it, Kristin decided she'd find happiness somewhere else without Greg knowing. Kristin found a job as a toxicologist at the San Diego Medical Examiner's office. But as her job became more demanding, Greg got worried. He understood her job was important, but she was spending less and less time at home. And it wasn't just long hours at work. There was something else going on. Now, what had led her to think like so? In June 2000, less than a year after their marriage, Kristin started having an affair with her boss, Michael Robertson, who was in charge of the toxicology lab. After a short time, Kristin decided to come clean with Greg and tell him everything that was happening. Kristin kept seeing Michael without Greg knowing for several months. It's hard to say why she told Greg if she wasn't going to end one of the relationships. But whatever her reasons were, Kristin says Greg was understandably crushed when he found out. Kristin said Greg spent about 2 days just staying in bed, not talking to anyone, after he found out about the affair. When he finally felt a bit better, Greg called Michael at home and confronted him about the affair, telling him to end it right away. But Michael refused. The affair went on for several more months. By October of that year, Kristin had not only destroyed their marriage, but she'd also thrown away 5 years of recovery. She fell back into addiction worse than ever before. In early November 2000, after the affair had been going on for about 4 or 5 months, and Greg found out, Kristin had fallen back into addiction. He reached a breaking point. He gave her a request: either quit her job and stay home, or he'd tell the medical examiner's office about both her affair and her addiction. Kristin was completely caught off guard. She was torn. Part of her still loved Greg. Otherwise, she wouldn't have stayed with him despite everything. But she was also deeply involved and loved with Michael, and the idea of losing him was unbearable. On top of that, she didn't want to give up her job as a toxicologist. She felt stuck and didn't know what to do. In November 2000, Kristin's path forward became clearer, and many of her troubles seemed to fade away. That's because at 9:15 p.m. on November 6th, Kristin dialed 911. She had discovered Greg unconscious on the floor and not responding. After all, Kristin called 911 to report finding her husband Greg unresponsive on the floor. She told the operator that he had taken his own life. Despite her attempts at CPR, Greg was declared deceased at the scene. When questioned by police, Kristin initially attributed Greg's condition to a mix of cold medicine and stress. She later suggested he might have overdosed on oxycodone. However, Greg's family disputed this, stating he wasn't the type to resort to such measures due to marital problems. Suspicion grew when Kristin's co-worker, Russ Lowe, learned of her affair with their boss, Michael. Russ believed there was more to the story than Kristin was letting on. This prompted a deeper investigation into Kristin and Michael's relationship. Greg's autopsy revealed he died from a fentanyl overdose. Kristin claimed Greg had been depressed and turned to medication, but Greg's family disagreed, asserting he wouldn't resort to drugs. Kristin's suspicious behavior, including purchasing rose petals found at the scene, raised further concerns. CCTV footage contradicted her alibi, placing her at a store minutes before she claimed to have returned home. Eventually, Kristin was charged with Greg's murder. Despite her appeals, she remains in prison, serving a life sentence. Greg's family sued Kristin for $100 million to prevent her from profiting from the case. They believe justice was served, but the pain of their loss remains irreparable. What do you think about this case? Stay tuned. We'll catch you with a new nail-biting crime thriller tomorrow.